Okay, so we'll begin again. So we finished before the last week, we finished the section on relation with the spiritual friend. So I think I mentioned it's unusual that Tsongkhapa had put that at the beginning of the text. It's understood to be partly because this text is meant ultimately to be a bridge to the tantric path, although it doesn't feature strongly in the LAM.RIM.CHEN.MO. Only the very last page says once you've mastered these practices, then you should think about entering the Vajrayana path. But it's understood that the relationship with the teacher is essential in Sutra, in Tantra, and in the Vinaya, in the Mahayana, and in the Vajrayana, all three. So it's not simply in the Vajrayana, but because there's a special kind of relationship that's necessary there, then that's emphasized here as a way of entering. I think it makes a lot of sense, really, to understand the importance of the relationship with one's teachers in terms of how successful one's practice becomes. Otherwise, it's just not just a matter of intellectual information or reading things in books. It's very possible to get wrong ideas. You have to have a living person who's lived this and experienced this, and otherwise it's very hard to comprehend exactly what it's saying. It's not easy to put into words. It's similar with the Vinaya itself. This is what Genjapa Kelvin used to say, which makes a lot of sense. After living here, you can see that you can't really understand the Vinaya from just reading a book about the vows for a monk. You have to live in a monastery and see how things are actually practiced. Otherwise, people get very rigid about certain vows that aren't actually that important, and don't really understand how to guard the important ones. So it comes from just being in a community where it's you can see how people, the very subtle attitude that's necessary for practicing these things. So anyway, after that section on the spiritual teacher, now second is the actual way of practicing, right? So it says Kyongsu Durdu de Dembalani, right? So that we're still actually in this section, right? Lam Gitsawa Sheninjita Densu, and then that's the way of relying on the teacher, which is the root of the path, and then Lo Jito Dromwe Rinpa after that. So we're still in this section on the spiritual teacher, but rather than the Drungse Tropa, it's called, right? The slight elaboration or digression into the actual teacher. Then here's Kyongsu Dordu Dempa, like in brief, how do you sustain a meditation session? So although it's here in this section of the spiritual teacher, it's not explicitly related to that. It's general for all of the meditations that are done in the book. You can use the same format for any kind of analytical meditation as is done in the book, in the entire LAM.RIM.CHEN.MO. So that is Kyongsu No, or the actual way, and then the Tsongkhapa, right, dispelling wrong views about that, which is mainly this idea that which was very prevalent in Tibet and is not any less prevalent now in many Buddhist communities or people who have ideas about Buddhism, is this idea that analytical meditation is a kind of oxymoron, that meditation means clearing your mind of any kind of thought. So how can you use analysis as a kind of meditation? So that theme comes up a lot in this text because Tsongkhapa noticed that as a major obstacle for a lot of Tibetans. So it comes up here in this section, and then most of all in the last section, the Lakdong-Chenmo, the special insight, which is the last 250 pages or so of the book. He keeps coming back to that point again and again and presenting it from different angles and all kinds of arguments against it, showing the faultiness of that viewpoint. So first here he has the Kyongsu No, right, the actual way of sustaining a meditation session. So that has, here we have Ni Lei, right, and then Tunging O the Jidar Chawa, Right, so the actual session, then after that will be the Tun Ki Tsam, right? And then between meditation sessions. So Tun, right, is like session of meditation here. So Tunging O La Jitar Chawa, so how to practice in the actual session. So it has Joe Chuni Druk, right? The six preparatory practices they're often called. So cleaning the place, and then making offerings, and then having the right posture, and then how to visualize, and then the different discordant and concordant conditions, and then finally will be the the requesting prayer at the end, which is a little later. So there's this section on the concordant conditions that's very long. So here, and also if you're all interested, there's the Joy Chudruk. We have a separate book on that, right, in the library. There's Georgia, I think it's called. It's an English book, but it has the Tibetan name. It's the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives publishes it. So, Joe Chuni Drukde. So Serlingba Namtar Yinpe. So it's saying this is the biography of Serlingba, meaning we're doing it in the way that Serlingba practiced it. It was very important in his practice. Right? Atisha's teacher Serlingba. So first as Nekang Lekbar Chidor Chela, right? So that means cleaning the place, right? Cleaning the place where you're going to be meditating, Nekang. Kusung Tukiten Lekbar Drang. So then display a body, speech, and mind representation. So it means set up an altar, right? First clean the place well, and then there's different advice on how to do that, like sprinkling. They go to the sprinkling saffron water with mantras. That's sort of the ritual way, but the more practical way is the actual cleaning, sweeping out and cleaning the walls, whatever else needs to be done. But then setting up the altar, so especially the body, speech, and mind representations, right? So it said ideally the altar should have at the very least a representation of the Buddha's body, like a statue, and then a representation of the speech, like a text, and then of the mind is usually a stupa, or if you don't have a stupa, you can use the Vajra and bell is also sufficient for that. But there's often other advice on more extensively what to do, what to put on your altar. There's the Kadampa system, which you have at least a statue of Tara, or an image of Tara, and of Akshobhya or Mitrukpa. I guess Mitrukpa and Akshobhya, it's the same being, but Akshobhya is Mikyopa. So what would Mitrukpa be?
Akshobhya means immovable, unshakable.
Okay, that's the both of them. I guess Mitrukpa and Mikyopa, maybe they both translate Akshobhya. I'm not sure, but they use in different contexts. Because we have Mikyopa is one of the 5 Buddha families, right? And then Mitrukpa is a separate deity that's practiced. But they're both often called Akshobhya, I think. Mitrukpa, the unshakable Mitrukpa, and then Mikyopa, it's pretty much the same, unmovable, and can't be. Yeah, it's really the same meaning, Mikyopa, Mitrukpa. So there's we have a whole book also in the library on setting up the altar, so that's good to have a look at if you want to do that. And usually making offerings, so we'll have that here. So it's the second one, right? Chupa, Yume Partsela, right? So search for offerings without deceit, right? So that it's important how you obtain the offerings. You shouldn't cheat people to get offerings, or take things that were stolen, or it's good to know the source of what you're getting. It's not important to have all the finest things if you can't get them. It's more important to do what is reasonable to get that won't harm others. So Chipa is for the Sanskrit puja, which I have a note. You know better than I do, but it's Tugnyepa. It says, right, pleasing the mind, puja, pleasing the mind of the teacher. Kyupa zeparjam. So arrange them beautifully, and kyupa. Jam, arrange beautifully, zeparjam, and then kyupa. So arrange. This kyupa and jam have the same meaning, really. So I'm not sure how exactly you could say it in English, but beautifully arranged arrangements, something like that. So then third is the meditation posture. Right? So the Nyensa by Sangha, the Sharavaka grounds. So Nimu ki dripale sem jongwe kapsu. So when you're practicing, when you're training your mind in order to dispel the obscurations of sleep and torpor, right? So you want to keep your mind alert when you're practicing. Rabzu, Penzun, Chak Gula. So it's good to walk back and forth. He's saying, if your mind is, if you're finding yourself falling asleep in the meditation session, then take some walk back and forth. It's sort of what they call walking meditation in some traditions. Although I know some Tibetan lamas have questioned whether there's any source for that in traditional texts. I don't know if this would be one. But in any case, whether you call it walking meditation, it's still useful just to walk around a bit and wake yourself up. So then other than those, right, other than the the obscurations of sleep and torpor, then in order to purify from other kinds of obstacles, such as desire for sense objects, then sem jongwei tse, so when you're training your mind in that way, chiwa driwala zope tengdu, so sit on a throne or a seat. Really, yeah, tree is like a large seat, driu is a little seat. So whatever you can find to sit on. Kyomo trung trundu koper chawa zumpe. So then sit in the kiltrung, really dorje kiltrung, right? The Vajra posture, which is the. So even in the English here, they have lotus posture, but that's not really correct translation because Padmasana, lotus posture, is the term used in the Hindu tradition. But in Buddhist tradition, Padmasana means something else, right? So the Vajrasana, the Dorje Kiltrung, is when you have both feet on top of either thigh. So that's what they call Padmasana in Hindu yoga traditions. But in the Buddhist tradition, the Padmasana, the lotus posture, is the female. So if you have the male and female deities, then the male is in the Dorje Kiltrung and the female is in the Padmasana. So that's with the legs wrapped around the father. So actually, when you do a fire puja, you're supposed to technically sit in Padmasana. It doesn't mean you wrapped around something, but you put your soles of your feet together, and that's Padmasana. In yoga they call it Baddha Konasana, something like folded. Konasana is angle posture. I think I forget Baddha, but in Western terms, butterfly. I think they call it. We used to when we had football training, sit in the butterfly as a way of stretching. So that's Padmasana here. So when he says Kiltrung, it probably means Dorje Kiltrung, the Vajra posture. And usually they talk about the 7 points of Vairocana, the sevenfold posture of Vairocana. Right, so you have which is, for one thing, sitting in the Vajra posture with the leg opposite feet on either thigh, and then with the back straight, with the chin slightly down, the bottom of the tongue pressed against the palate, not the bottom of the tongue pressed against the palate so you don't drip saliva, but then with the mouth slightly open, the eyes slightly open so that you're not don't fall asleep, but also aren't so open that you're distracted, and then the hands folded with the thumbs touching. Anyway, you can find descriptions of that in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand by Pabongkar Rinpoche. He gives a more detailed description of that. There's a verse he quotes from Nsapa. There's a nice verse you can use as a reference point for remembering the 7 points. So that sitting, the posture is very important for meditation, of course. If you're, as he's saying here, if your body's in the right posture, then you can focus much more easily. It comes more naturally. And as you get into more advanced practices, it says that with the winds and channels in Tantra, then of course it's essential. But even in normal practice, sutra level practice, it affects the energies of the body the way you sit. So having a proper posture. That's why there's so much emphasis nowadays in yoga on the asana. We were talking about this, I think, before, not here, but outside of the class, about how in traditional yoga, there's the 8 limbs of yoga, and the third one is asana. So nowadays in Western yoga, that's what's become popular. People like physical exercise. So maybe there's a little bit more emphasis on it than needs to be, but nevertheless, it's understood as one of the limbs of meditation practice is to have proper posture and have the body physically fit. If the body is feeling fit and pliant, then it's meditation comes in more naturally than if you're feeling uncomfortable in your body. So Nemel Devala, so on a comfortable seat, Nemel Devala, Lu Trumpa Sangde, so sit straight. Ne Kyomo Trungam, Kyomo Trungje, right? So the Vajra or the half Vajra posture, right? So if you can't do the full, where each foot is on each thigh, then you have one foot on the opposite thigh and then the other one folded under. But for most people, especially Westerners who don't sit this way from a young age, then it's actually quite hard to do either of those. So it's ideal at least to sit in the best possible posture. If you can't sit at all cross-legged for a period of time, they say you can sit in a chair, but it's good eventually to be able to sit cross-legged. It seems to focus the mind more if the legs are crossed than if you're sitting on a chair. And you're more likely to slouch, I think, sitting on a chair. So Che Duyang, Rungwei. So either whatever one you can do, Cholamgi. So with that, sit that way. Kapsu Drawatang, Semke Kipa, Gyu Tang, Tre Ngebar Cha. So it says go for refuge and generate bodhicitta, and mix that with your mind. So do not just when it says Kapsu Drawa Semkepa, it's talking about reciting the words. Right? And then it says mix it with your mind. It means don't just recite the words. It means actually think about what you're saying. So then next is the visualization. So Dungi Namkala Gachen Jupadang Zamotawe Gyube Lama Nam. So in the space in front of you, it's usually they say, what is it about? And it's quite a bit in front. I forget what do they say. Cubit, I think. What is it? Prostration length. That's right. One length prostration in front, so that full prostration. So it's a fair amount in front. Then you want to have the Gache Chupa and the Samo Tower, the two lineages. The lineage of the extensive practice from Azanga, and then the lineage of the profound view from Nagarjuna. Here it's talking about the LAM.RIM, right? You have the Lama Chopa lineage, merit field, which also has those, but in the LAM.RIM merit field, it's slightly different. It also has on either side the two lineages, but then the central figures are quite different. Like in the Lama Chopa, then you have the tantric lineages above Tsongkhapa and all the tantric deities below and all that. In LAM.RIM lineage, it's a little more simplified, but there's still quite a lot of deities. In any case, so you have those. If you want to have a good visualization of that in Liberation in Our Hands, right? The liberation of the palm of your hand, and there's the other translation of it by Geshe Tarchin, and that in the first volume, in the appendix, there's a key. It's actually the Lama Chopa merit field, because I think a lot of people, like myself personally, because it's hard to memorize too many different merit fields. You just use the same one. So there they have the Lama Chopa merit field, and they have a key to it. It's the only place I've seen it where it indicates which deity is which. So you can start to get familiar with all the different deities in that, and then look at a picture, gradually get we say in Tibetan dunji, a meeting generality, an appearance to your mind of that becomes more like you can sustain to some degree. So then Zhenyang, so that, and then Sangye Tang, Jundis Sempa Papa Nyentu Tang. So the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, the Arya Saravakas, and the Rang Sangye, the Pratika Buddhas. Kadu Tang Chepa. So those abiding in the sacred word of the Buddha, meaning that people who are the protectors and the dakinis and so forth, who have pledged to protect the teachings. Ideally, they're enlightened beings, right? Like, for example, Mahakala, Palden Lama are considered to be enlightened beings. So in some sense, it's a manifestation. They don't have to pledge to protect the teachings. They themselves are Buddhas, but they're in the aspect of having pledged to protect the teachings. So Chepa Pakti Mepa Jupar Zamde. So imagine these limitless ones sitting before you. So Sok Sope Jing Selda. So imagine the field for accumulating merit, right? Celled up. So clearly place it. Celled up also means to remember, but it means just bring it to mind, right? Clearly bring it to mind. So then the fifth one. This is a very long section. This will go on for up until for 4 more pages. So dene lam gula kebe tungyen sok sopatang. So then now for the concordant conditions for generating in your mind the paths is to accumulate merit, sok sopa, and gyelkien dripa zhongwei, and purifying the discordant conditions, which are obscurations. Lenjik chenkin mena. So if you don't have that as the conducive condition for your practice, as is lenjik chenkin, Nirlengi gu mignam kyongwat samla be kyang. So though you make effort in the nirlang, right, the substantial cause, which is miknyam kyong, which is sustaining the object of visualization. The mikpa is the observed object, and the nampa is the aspect. Right. So you take, for example, if you observe, there's different ways to understand this. Right. One is that you take the aspect of the table, so that's the observed object. Sorry, not aspect, I shouldn't say. You take the table of the observed object, and then you meditate on the aspect of impermanent. So that's nam. Another way to understand it is the subjective and objective aspects, which is that you have so you visualize the teacher. That's the appearance, the objective aspect, and the subjective aspect is the mind of faith that's generated. So it just has to do with what visualization you sustain and how you hold that. So that's, of course, the substantial cause. That's what you're trying to improve and increase that. But you need the supporting causes, which is having accumulation of merit and purification. Lama Tsongkhapa, when I asked him because we'd studied all about come abiding. So when you study that in the 7th year here, you start thinking, really it would be good to do this. You can see all the benefits of doing it. And there's all the information in the text on how to do it. So I asked Rinpoche how to do it. And I'd already read the text, but sort of give more advice. And his advice was basically, the most important thing is accumulation of merit. And it's more so than doing all of the steps properly. Although that's also important, but really it's like the Rinpoche often emphasize this. It's like if you have all the right understanding of emptiness from reading in a text, but you don't have merit, then you won't realize emptiness. But even if you don't have quite the right understanding from the text, but you have a lot of merit, then you'll have the opportunity to have the realization. So that you really need that supporting part of it. Of course, ideally, you want to have both, and we shouldn't necessarily say that you just need merit, and the understanding isn't important. They both support each other. But often it says this in the text that if you're the more purification and accumulation you do before, then it all just comes very naturally if you do retreat on these kinds of things. Whereas without that, then you can spend a very long time making effort and following instructions, but not a lot might seem to happen. So although saying right here, although you put effort into that, LAM.RIM.CHEN.MO. So it would be very difficult to generate the path in your mind if you don't have the purification and accumulation. Sakjangi nenam dube yenlak dube gyu jongo so. Right, so you need to put effort. So sakjagi ne, right, is the points of sakjang, right? Sakjang means accumulation, purification. It's used in colloquial also, sakjang. Dupe yanlak dumpe. So then the sevenfold prayer, the seven limb prayer. I mean, really not prayer, it's not the right word. The seven limb practice, there's no word prayer here. Yanlak dumpa. That includes that. So it includes all the main points of accumulation and purification. Yu Jongoso. So you should purify your mind like that. So just briefly about purification, because I mentioned about Rinpoche, but I think I said before, and most of you know, I think, Rinpoche, when he came to Sera several times, he made this point that the most profound preliminary practice is to follow the schedule at Sera. He said this is more purification than doing prostrations and Vajrasattva and all those other practices that that are generally considered to be the purification practices. We have that in Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand too. Babongkar Rinpoche, he says that like when you have the remedy, you have the four opponent powers, and one of them is remedy. He says it doesn't necessarily have to be the Vajrasattva mantra or something else. It can be whatever. And the example he uses is when you're at the monastery and you go to the Damcha. There's a Damcha tonight, and you go and sit in the Damcha. So yeah, I'm smiling a bit because I missed some of the Damchas this week. But if you're here a very long time, you see whatever part of the schedule that you're following, you can use that as your practice. You think, I'm doing this as a way of purifying my mind. And Rinpoche often assigned anyway to people to do these other practices, and I think that's also good. I encourage people, like I myself did over the years, is when you have time during the break times to do prostrations and other preliminary practices and retreats. It's something quite different than being in a community, is being by yourself doing these practices. But it shouldn't be seen as that is more important. The main focus here is to be in the community and doing these things, and that's how it's often presented in the monastery, that they discourage people from doing too much practice on their own. That takes away from the community. You do practice in your room, and then you don't show up for the puja in the morning. Then overall that harms the community. And I was going to say. So it occurred to me when we have this, the Yanlak Dumpa, so we'll have Zangcho Chenmo in a couple of months, in January. So I haven't been for quite a few years, as I mentioned before. Rinpoche actually told me not to, because he said to do a retreat during that time, but I will go this year because they've kind of forced us to go. But actually I really like going. When Rinpoche first told me to stop going to Zangcho Chenmo, actually I was very disappointed, and I wouldn't have disregarded Rinpoche's advice, but I felt very ambivalent about missing it, because I used to love going every year. So it was nice to have the opportunity to do that again. And that's why it brought up in my mind, because the Yanlak Dunpa, that's the main focus of Zangcho Chenmo, is the Sangchu Monlam, right, the King of Prayers. It's all built around that. And the main focus of that is the seven limb prayer at the beginning of the Sangchu Chenmo, of the Sangchu Monlam. And we chant it very nicely in Sangcho Chenmo. So it's a very good opportunity to have that. So here he's going to go through all of the first 7 verses or so, a little more than 7, the opening verses to the Sangcha Monlam. So it's not, I say 7, there's 7 limbs, but especially the offering limb has quite a few verses, so it's more than 7 verses. So here we have, he lists them one by one. The la chaksa wa yanlak la gosum dompe chakni, right? So the limb of prostration is the first one. So it has the prostration chak. Chak just means hand, but in Tibetan they use chak to mean chak sel, to offer your hands, which means to prostrate. So yana go so with your three doors, with your body, speech, and mind, all added together. So it's not just reciting the prayer, it's not just the physical prostration, it's the mental attitude also. So Jine Sudak, that's the first line of Sangju Monam. So I think Dokme can recite it, right? Jine Sudak Chokchu Jikten Na Dusun Shepe Mihi Senge Kun Dagi Molo Deda Tamche La Le Tang Le Dangagi Dangwe Chagi Hu, right? So to all the Buddhas in tender Jine Sudak Juti Nitanam. So as many Buddhas as there are in all worlds, Jine Sudak Chuk, in the 10 directions, Shuddha Jikten Na Dusun Sempe Mihi Senge Kun. So all the lions among humans, among the 3 times and 10 directions. Dagi Maldo de Tamchela, so all of those without exception. Ludangangi Dawe Chagi Hu. So with my body, speech, and mind, I with the Dangwa, like what do you say? Clear is not quite the right word, but lucid body, speech, and mind, I pay homage to them. So that's the verse of prostration. Shepe sikche chikte. So that's one verse he's saying. Jitingi kam chok rewatang durere sangi maingi. So he's saying not just some directions and not just sometimes, but all the Buddhas at all times and all directions. Chokchuna, chokchukana, so all 10 directions. Shukpatang, ngarjun, simpa, so those came in the past. Mohompana, so those who will come in the future. Mohompa jompa gurwatang. Tanda jungwei, so all those are also existing now. Gyalwa tamche la, so all the victors. I said Buddhas, victors, Jina, right? Jinas. Migne, so visualize all of them. Shengi yamla gupatar. Shengi yamla gupatar. Gupataba mimpar. Sampatapane. Gosung Gube Chaksalo. So I think Gyupa, it's not having somebody else force you to do it, that you're doing it from the bottom of your heart, is the idea. Saying Yamla, I'm forgetting what Yam, but the Yamla Gyupa, it sounds like it's implying that you are doing this from the bottom of your heart, and not just because somebody else is inciting you to do so. So then, they are Sange Chikla Chak Selnayang, so although you only prostrate to one Buddha, Sonam Paktu Mepala, so there's inconceivable benefit. Sange De Tsamla Mekne Chak Selna. So if you just visualize that one Buddha and prostrate, Tachi Mu She Lobon Yeshi De Drawa Shedo. So there's the commentary on the King of Prayers by Lobon Yeshi De, right? One of the very early translators, the first in the Nagyar, the earlier translation. I think 8th century he was Yeshi De. So it's like even if you just prostrate to one Buddha that way and visualize one Buddha that way, then there's inconceivable benefit or merit in doing so. So Gosam Sosoe Chakla Luki Chakni. So then the individual, you have the body, speech, and mind. So first the body, Luki Chak. Zampa Jipa. So that's again quoting the Sangju Monam, right? Sampa Jipa Depe Dopta Ki Gawa Kuni Higi Onsum Du. Sampa Jipa Depe Dopta Ki Gawa Tamji Higi Onsum Du. Lungi Duala Shuga Dupai Gawa Tamchi Lada Chupergi. Tope knows it better than I do, right? Sampa Jipa Depe Dopta Ki Gawa Tamji Higi Onsum Du. Shingi Duna Chuda Dupai Gawa Kuni. Yeah. So it's to the force of the power of the good deeds, sampujopa, right? Then as many Buddhas as there are as atoms in the world, shingiduna de la kupai, gawa de la nana chaksalo, right? So that's visualizing as many atoms, as many bodies as are atoms in the world, and you're prostrating to all the Buddhas. Now, I might think that would be a mental prostration because you're visualizing all the atoms of Buddhas, atoms of your body. All the many bodies as atoms of the world. I don't think it'd be easy to do that with your body, but I guess it's considered. This is the physical prostration in this case. So Gawa Chok Tong Dugi Dupa Tamche. So the Buddhas who are included in all the times and directions. Yigi Yuldu Ngonzumla Ngonzumbatar Mikla. So imagine that they are appearing directly to your mind. Rangi Lu Jing Namgi Rangi Lu Shi Namgi Du Traraptang Tran Yampar. So as many bodies as there are atoms in all the world systems or all fields, but it means all places. Trula Chaksho. So emanate all those bodies and make prostrations. Deang Yul Namgi Sambu Chibula Rabdu Depe Top Kiede. So then generate a fervent faith through the force of fervent faith in the good deeds of all those objects, meaning all of the Buddhas to whom you're prostrating. De kune lama deo. So then be motivated by that strength of that faith. Lu chigi chak chepayang. So even if you just prostrate with one body, sonam chena. So even if that's great merit, lu de samgi chak chepani. So if you prostrate with that many bodies, sonam shindu chewoho. Then it's very big merit. So one is big, and then and then inconceivable is very big. So I guess very big is the biggest you can get. So she lopon yeshi de sungo. So then again lopon yeshi de, he said this in his commentary. Then yigi chak. So then the mental prostration. So then that's the next verse, verse 3. Dujik tengna dunye sange nam sange sheni una shupa da. Tera chuji yingna malupa tamchi gawa dagi gawa me. Right. So this is a very famous verse. Right. On one atom are many Buddhas as numberless as all atoms, and I have confidence that in all worlds of 10 directions there are just as many Buddhas as that on each atom. Right. His Holiness has the book, The Universe in a Single Atom. Right. That's this because the King of Prayers is taken from the Ganda Vyuha Sutra, the Dombo Kope Do, the Ray of Stock Sutra, which then it comes from the Apatamsaka, which it's saying in that sutra there's a lot of talk about these philosophical concepts, but then it's condensed into this prayer on one atom, or as many Buddhas as there are atoms of the world. So Gengoman Sangye used to say, what is it? His way of saying it was that it's that the Buddha, every Buddha pervades every world system. It's not that if you take a little microscope and look in the atom, you're going to see little Buddhas on each atom. Then we generally contradict that by looking. But it's that the Buddha, the mind of the Buddha pervades all directions. So in that sense, they're all present. It's just a matter of the obscuration that prevents us from experiencing that. So Sik Chik Day. So Du Charap Rere Tenian. So upon each subtle atom as well, Du Tam Chigi Trong Tanya Be Sangye. So there's as many Buddhas as there are atoms. Kor Jang Sengi Korwe Una. And they're sitting in the center of a retinue of bodhisattvas. Shumpala Deraki Yunde Jesu Drembe Mupa Kepo Ho. So then generate a Mupa is very hard to translate. Faith or belief or wish. So those probably sums up the different meanings, but those are quite different words in English. So generate such a faith or a belief or a aspiration that's the case. Remembering that that's the case. Remembering all their qualities. So ngagi chakni, so then prostration with the speech. Dera ngakba shepit sikche chikte. So that's the okay. Dera ngaba meaning gets a nam, and then dera ngaba. Yaki gatsungi gawo yeah. Dera ngaba me. Yaki gawo. You see, I haven't been to L.A.M.RIM.CHEN.MO in too many years, right? Dera ngaba gets a drakungi gawo. Yeah. So it's saying, I sing the praise of all the Buddhas with the voice of Brahma, as many voices there are, right? So you emanate many voices singing the praises of all the Buddhas. Yeah, yangi yala getsu drakungi yeah. Tera ngamba mise getsu nam. So that inexhaustible oceans, mise getsu nam yangi yala getsu drakungi. So then inexhaustible oceans of melodious sound, but yang is here the sung yang, right? The melody of Brahma. Yang yala gatsu drakungi gawakungi yunan radu ju, right? I express the qualities of all the inconceivable Buddhas. Yeah, gawakungi yunan radu jing. They worship at Hamshidagi Du, right? So when I praise all the Sugatas, they worship at Hamshidagi Du. Those gone to bliss. Yul Namgi Yundengi Ngakpa Semi Shipanam. So then all of the objects, all the qualities of all the objects are praised. Zemi Jipa. So it does not know exhaustion, meaning there's no known end to it. It's just inexhaustible. Lu Revela Go Paktu Mepatang. So everybody has infinite heads. I guess that's what it means. When you're prostrating to each one, then Go Revela Che Paktu Mepar Pruva Zumba Tar. So yeah, because the idea is that when you're emanating all these bodies, then all the bodies, at least, head is a bit odd to think of a body with infinite heads, but the point is there's infinite mouths that are expressing this, right? And then with infinite tongues, it's expressing this in all the languages of the world and in many, many voices, not just your one voice. She Sumpadar Chene, so do like that. Nyempe Yangi Jupar Chao, so then express it with a melodious voice. Dear Yangni, so what is melody here? It's dupa yenla, it's a praise, melodious praise. De yanlakni, gu de cheu. So then, it's saying in the verse, right? Yangi yenlak gatso drokungi, right? So oceans of branches of melody. So saying the branch here is the cause. Right? That's often we see in the text that yenlak is meant to be the cause of something, like the branch that leads to it. And that's J, it's the tongue. So the Yang Yenlak is talking about the tongue that expresses the melody. Gyatso ni mompo tsiko. So then an ocean means many. It's not that you literally have an ocean of sound. That doesn't make much sense, but there's a very extensive sound or a vast sound. So then that's the first, the limb of prostration. Right, so then chupi and lakla, lana yupe, chupani. Right, so first you have the branch of offering. It begins with the surpassed offerings, lana yupa, those of which there is something superior. Right, so that's the most superior offering is going to be the last one. It's a separate verse, but first you have the ones that do have something superior to them, which is just the physical offerings. So Medo Dhamma Tremwa Dhampa Tang Jima Podar Yuran Sini Nama Dupa Drukjor Tang Marme Chota Dupa Chupai Gawa Dara Nani Chupergi, right? So Marme Chok Tang Marme Dhampa Marme Pedo Dhampa Chinian Dhampa Tang, right? So various flowers. Actually, he goes through them one at a time, right? Medo Dhampa Tremwa Dhampa Tang. So then rosaries. So we just go through them one at a time. So metok dampani, right? So excellent flowers. La tamil miyu la sope metok. So flowers of the god in the human realm. Meru jomwa silmanamso. So all those excellent flowers that are very silma, like pleasant or beautiful. And tremwani, so then rosaries, right? Metok not so pale day. So then a collection of many flowers. As in a flower rosary. Gupate, so then strung together. De nikayang tang chima tamchidu. So in both cases, when we're talking about flowers and flower rosaries, it's both actual, meaning actually arranged, then chuma means made, meaning ones that you imagine. Or you could also take it to be saying that there's just naturally occurring flowers and ones that have been planted. But I think here the main thing is that you arrange them and you imagine them. Yitru, yeah, probably. Chuma is probably Yitru here, right? Like in the Tundru, right? So then Zilnian ni, so then melodious sound, right? Zilnian, Zilnian nam, this is all melodious sound, right? Zilnian ni, Romo Gyuchen Tang, so there's music, it's saying. Gyuchen Tang, Pupa, so then things that you blow, like horns. Dongwa, so things that you strike, like drums. And Troba, things that you play, like a harp. Namso, so all of those. And then Jukpa ni, Tu Shimpe Diguho. So Jukpa is anointing with fragrant incense. I think perfumes, really, the idea. Tu usually means incense, but here it's talking about like perfumes that you anoint somebody with. And then Duk Chokni, His Holiness made a joke about this. I remember he was teaching him on LAM.RIM.CHEN.MO. It's funny, I don't remember most of what he said maybe during those 5 years of LAM.RIM teachings that he gave, but I remember him saying this, Duk Chokni, Duk Nambi Choko. He was laughing about it. He's saying, because what does this say here? It says, the verse says supreme umbrellas, and then Tsongkhapa says, what are supreme umbrellas? It's the supreme of all umbrellas. So His Holiness was joking. It doesn't really explain the verse, but I think we can get the point. Duk Chokni, Duk Namgi Choko. Sometimes that's the best, I guess, all you can say. But also, umbrella isn't the right word, actually. It should be parasol, right? Duk is umbrella also, but you don't have to imagine offering Amazon umbrellas or something. You just you can parasol is more of an ornate thing than an umbrella. And then marmeni, so then butter lamps, right? Marla sopa, so then that's including incense. He's saying, made of incense and made of butter and other things. So tri jim jing, so with a fragrant scent, is zelo and clear light. Rinchewe nurbu is zelo, and also shiny jewels. You imagine that you're offering the light from shiny jewels. But the main offering, of course, is the light. Like Gelong Tenzin Gache says here, it's okay to use rancid butter because you're offering the light, you're not offering the butter. Of course, he's saying here it's to smell nice. I don't know if you burn rancid butter, if it would smell, how it would smell. I haven't tried that. But in any case, the main thing here is the light. So whatever way you can produce that light. So dukpa ni. So then dukpa is like incense. I meant we haven't had incense yet, but we had the word bi in both the fragrant perfumes and the candles. But here you have actual incense, dukpa. So dukpa jarwatang nachikboho. So it's the same as it's saying it's the same as jarwa as we had. So it's applying fragrant incense. And then, so that's the first verse, right? We finished the first verse. And then, Nasa dampa nam tang chichok tang chima parat yiranya patang. Kupe kipa gatsu drokungi gawa dara dane chupergi, right? So, Nasa dampa nam, so all the wonderful clothing, right? Or cloth. But really, clothing, nasab is clothing. So, gi tamchiki choko, again, the supreme of all clothing. Gonagi, gi tamchiki choko. And then Drit Chokni, so what is the supreme of all scents? So he doesn't say Trinam Ki Chok. He gives a little bit more explanation here. Chu Yun Chap Du Sua, so then fragrant water arranged in offering bowls. Yun Chap. Yun is offering and Chap is water, right? So arranged as water offerings. Zuba Serde, so that's what it's saying. He said that's what it's called. So water that is anointed with this fragrant scents that come that fill all the 3,000 worlds, or 3,000 is not right. Trikolakasm, as they call it, right? Tong Su means 1,000 to the third power. It doesn't mean 3,000 in this context. So I guess a billion, right? Tong Su means 1,000 times 1,000 times 1,000. Tong Su. So the billion world systems. And then Chema Purma. So then, a fragrant sandalwood heaped high as Mount Meru. That's how it's translated, right? Fragrance. So yeah, fragrant. Chema here is like fragrant sandalwood. That doesn't literally mean sandalwood, but that's the idea. It's things that have been cut up. Chema Purma, on a mountain, Purma. Shimpo Chema Torjing. So sprinkled. So here it's like loose incense is the idea, that you're piling up loose incense. Duktu Rongwa, so it's suitable to be burned as incense. Pumpo Chepaham, and Kyokor Dripe Sun. So then, like that, wrapped up that way, or drawn in a mandala. Che Pewe, and then spread out. Rimpa Gya Tang Ngambri Rap Tang Nyambaho. Right, so it has many. It has many. Rimpa Gya, I mean it's the boundaries, right? The levels of the boundaries, and then it's equivalent to Mount Meru. Its size is equivalent to Mount Meru. And then Gyupani. So what does it mean to arrange that, right? So Nasa Dampa Namdan Trichok Dang Chema Pora Riranya Patang Kupe Kepar. So yeah, special arrangements. Kupe Kepar Goma Kungi Tar Jarwade. So it's saying apply that to all the previous things that have been talked about. Right? So you have all of the incense and the lights and the clothing and so forth. They're all arranged in this very special way. Tarjade Pil Chewatang Trepatang Natsokpala Chao. So, so for the most part, and ornamented and variegated. Right? So that's saying what is the meaning of this special kind of arrangement. Is that they're arranged in an ornamental fashion. They're arranged in a variegated fashion. And then Chipa Lana Mepani. So we have the Lana Mepe Chipa, but Lana Yupe Chipa, right? The surpassable offerings, and now we have the unsurpassable offerings. When you study Trangi Lekshe Ningpo here, then you'll get used to this phrase, Lana Yopa, Lana Mepa. Because in the Dode Gondrel, the Sutra Unraveling the Thought, it just says it over and over again. That's that passage from the Chongkor, right? The Lana Yop, Lana Chipatang, Kap Chipatang. The first two wheels of the turning of the wheel are surpassable. And the third turning of the wheel is Lana Machipa, Kap Machipa. It's unsurpassable. It has nothing superior to it. Lana Mepa. Lana Yopa, Lana Mepa. So, Chupa Gana Lama Gache Wa. Chupa Lana Gache Wa. Chupa Lana Gache Wa. Ene, Tobe. Chupa Lana Lama Gache Wa. Tera Gache Tawayan Layam Mu. Sampo Chupa Devla Dubdaki. Gawakuna Chaksel Chupergi. Right? So that's that last line of offering. We had the previous ones, and here is the last one. So Chupa Ganam Shepet Sikche. So it's one verse. Lana Yupani. So what is surpassable? Jitinbe Chupa Yinpe. So that surpassable one is the worldly offering. Dirni. So here, Janda Sempa Lasopa Tuche Namgi Zangu Truho. So it's all the wonderful things that are emanated by the bodhisattvas and others, through the power of the bodhisattvas and others. All the powerful ones such as bodhisattvas and others. So it's all that they can emanate with their minds. So that's no longer worldly offerings. We could say zakje, zakme, but contaminated, uncontaminated. Sikampa tamanini, so the second two lines, right? So chamba, chupa, lana, nama, gache, wa, and what is it? Chupa lanam, huh? Dera Gyawa Tamche Layan Nu. So that's the first two lines in it. Sampa Chipe Depe Dopdaki. So for the force of the prayer of the praise of the for force and faith in the good deeds. Gyawa Kuna Chaksel Chupurgi. So I prostrate and make offerings to all the Buddhas. Chupurgi. So those two lines. Gomba Deni Matsanwa Tamchela. So it's saying all the whatever was not fulfilled in those first two lines, Jarde. To then apply it to all of that, Chak Dang. Chupanamgi Kulong Tang Yuldun Baho. So it says it explains for all I see. The Gomani is probably talking about the Chaksawa and the Chupa, right? So we had the first two limbs, the limb of prostration and the limb of offering. So, and it's not just those. He's saying you apply it to all 7 limbs, but here these 2 lines are explaining the motivation and the object to which you do these things, right? So you're prostrating to whom, and for what motivation? So you're prostrating with the motivation of faith in good deeds, and you're prostrating to all the Buddhas. Gyawa kuna chaksil chupurgi, right? So that these lines are kind of special. They're in the middle, but they should apply to all of the limbs. So then dikpa shakpe yanlak. So then the third yanlak, the third limb, which is the confession of past negativity. So dochak sheda temu wangi ni luda ngak tande jini gi kyang. Deba dagi gi pati jipa dera hamshi dagi susu shak. Right? So all non-virtue that I have accumulated with my body, speech, and mind being overwhelmed by hatred, attachment, and ignorance, all those I confess individually. The dochak shepe chikte. So gyuduk sun la tene. So based upon one's 3 poisons, the cause of the 3 poisons, attachment, hatred, and ignorance. Ji lu la zopa. So on the basis of your body and so forth, so your body, speech, and mind. Sungi, so those 3. Rang Jini, so Sungi Rang Jini. So then so what is the actual thing? It's dagi gipate, the things that you have done. De ang nguzu, so the things you actually did. Rangi chawa, de la shupatang, so the things you actually engaged in yourself. And a shedu jukpatang, the things that you incited others to do. And sengi chepa la yirangwal, so that you rejoiced in others doing. Right? Yeah. Derak tamche chir dibani. So that's then what is that all? It's generally condensed into chi chipa, whatever thing. So whatever. So dochak shedon timo wangi ni luda ngak tande jiniki kyong. Dibadagi giba chi chipa. Right. So whatever I did. Derag nimi trene. So remember the faults of that, the drawbacks of that. Ngamala gyuching. So then have a regret for the past ones. And chimala dampe semki. So with a mind that you will restrain yourself in the future. Semgi ning tabane shakna. So if you confess from the bottom of your heart, narche pewa cheching. So all those that you did in the past, you will stop them from increasing. Chebo cheching, chimanam kro chepo, and it will cut the continuum of doing them in the future. You'll stop doing them from now on. So that's the limb of confession. Of course, that has the 4 opponent powers, but he'll explain that separately. Or I think we already did, so we don't need to go through that now. So then, Jzi Rangwei and Lagni. So then the limb of rejoicing, right? So Chochu Gawa Kundan Sange se Rangya Lambda Loptom Bi Loptang Gawa Kungi Sonangala Jowa Kungi Sanangalayan Dera Kungi Disudagi wrong. Right? So the Chokchu Gawa Kundang Sange se. So the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the 10 directions. Rangel Nam Ta Loptom Mi Loptang. So the Buddha, the Pariteka Buddhas, and those training and those not training, so meaning those who are already reached liberation. Jowa Kungi Sonaganlai, and then also in the merit of all ordinary beings, Tera Kungi Desudagirong. So I rejoice in all of that. So Gangzak Ngapu, so those 5 beings. So what is it? The Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, here the Pariteka Buddhas, and then the trainees, and then the non-trainees, and then the ordinary beings. He got 6 actually, but maybe he's not counting one of them. Because if you think, maybe the Milopa probably includes the Gyalwa already, right? It would be strange to say those not training. Unless the Milopa and Milopa actually probably both refers to Nyenta, right? The Shravakas, those training and those not training. Although in general, the Buddha is also a Milopa. So Dehe Gewa Penyon Drene. So remember all of the benefits of their virtues. Uba Teranepatar. So like a poor person who has found a jewel or found a treasure. Ngawa Gombo. So then you can meditate on joy in that case. So that's often advised, to think about all the wonderful things that you can share in that merit. And this doesn't have to take a lot of effort to do so, but you can feel joy that kind of thing is happening, and to counteract jealousy. We talk about this in Kabnipa, right? When you study Kabnipa, we'll talk quite a bit about the Jizi Yurangwa and the debate about it. So if you get half someone's merit, well, if the Buddha has inconceivable merit, then if you even get one little piece of that, don't you already become a Buddha? Because if it's infinite, there's no real piece of it, right? So these are the kind of things you can debate in Kapnipa in chapter 2 of Parchen. There's the GC, there's the Drupa Gon, what is it? Zakje Golnam and the Zabme Golnam, right? The contaminated path of meditation and the uncontaminated, the Zakme Golnam. So the Zakje Golnam is Mupa Golnam, Ngoa Golnam, and GC Rang Golnam, right? So the path of the path of meditation, of aspiration. So that's when you have your faith, right? You have faith in the perfection of wisdom, and then the niwa, so the dedication, and then the jesiran, the rejoicing. So that's how you accumulate merit, mainly in the sutra path, for an Arya Bodhisattva, by practicing that. And then you have the Zakme Golnam, is Drupa Golnam and Nanda Golnam, which is the direct perception of emptiness. The same thing, right? Drupa Golnam and Nanda Golnam are Ngowo Chikto Patare, we say. Anyway, that's a bit of a sidetrack, but you'll discuss these things. It's, as I said before, with the LAM.RIM, it's very important to see how everything we study here, it directly bears upon the LAM.RIM. So it's actually much more extensive. Here you just have JC Yerang Yenlak, and you just have these 2 lines, you rejoice. But when you study Parchen, then you talk about JC Yerangwa for quite a while and debate about it. So then when you read about it, you have a little bit more of a kind of confidence in what it's talking about. Otherwise, it can seem a bit like cheating, isn't it? When the first time I did Nungne retreat at Kurokula Center in Boston, and then Nick Rebush was there. He's obviously very involved with the center, but he was saying he was very happy that we were all doing Nungne, so he said he's going to stay home and rejoice. So that's, I guess, you get the same merit if you rejoice. So someone else can do the work. But generally speaking, that's actually true. If you really have the proper mind, it's not just a matter of being lazy, but you can't always do everything, but you can rejoice. There's that story that's often cited in the sutras. I'm sure you all know of King Prasanajit, or Pasanadi, Selgyal in Tibetan, right? Who was the king of what was the kingdom's name? Kosala, right? Kosala. Shravasti was the capital, but Kosala, I think. There's Magad in the east, and Bimbasara was the king there in the west. Yeah, Prasanajit. Yeah. Anyway, I think it's Kosala, but the Shravasti was the capital, but that's not important to the story. So he was a great donor to the Buddha, but he was also known to not have been enlightened. He didn't achieve any particular paths in his lifetime, but he was very respectful of the Buddha and gave him lots of offerings. So he invited the Buddha and all of his great arhat students to a feast, and there was a beggar, Ubodepa, right, which means poor peaceful, who was watching this and rejoicing how great it is that the king is doing this and gaining so much merit. So then the king asked the Buddha, who in this land has accumulated the most merit today, and the Buddha, assuming the Buddha would say, you did because you offered this all to me. And he said, the most merit today has been accumulated by Ubodepa, right? The one who's rejoicing outside. And the king was a bit chagrined by that. So then he invited him again, and again that happened. So then the third time he set out his guards, and they beat him. They beat Ubodepa, who then, I guess he was upset, so he didn't rejoice that day. So then when the king asked the Buddha who has the most merit, he said, well, you do today, king. So he was very happy that he had the most merit. I don't know how he didn't offset it by setting his guards out like that, but anyway, the point is it's cited as an example of the power of rejoicing. And it's not a matter of how much you have, it's a matter of your mind, that you see these things happening and you feel good about it and you share in it. So Chongkor Korwe Gyueyanla. So then requesting to turn the wheel of Dharma. Gangnam Chochu Juten Juden Gangnam Chochu Gangnam Choktu Jikten Girbadak Gangnam Chochu Ditin Girbadak Ganda Rebak Sangi Machanye Kumbo Dera Dagi Tamchila Korlana Mepakua Gu, right?
Yes.
So Gangnam Chokchu Gangnam Chokchu Jikten Joma Dak. Yeah, so there's all those lights of the world in the 10 directions, right? Gangnam Chokchu Ditin Joma Dak, and then Tanda Rimbar Sangi Macha Nye, right? So those training and training their minds on the paths to enlightenment, and who have attained Buddhahood, which is free of attachment. Macha Nye, Gompo Deda Gitam Chela. So to all those Buddhas, all of the protectors, right? Kolo Lana Mepaku, I incite them to turn the unsuppressed wheel of Dharma. So Chokchu Shingdu. So in all worlds of 10 directions, Janudu Namper Sangete. So those who are have become complete Buddhas and manifest enlightenment. Ma Chakshing, so have no chakpa. So it says attachment, right? Ma Chakpa, but Ma Chakpa Topa Mepa. In that case, chakpa is a general word for nyonmo, right? So that for no afflictions. And then topa mepa, they have no obscuration. That's talking about shedrup. So I'm laughing because last night at the Geshe Damcha, I was a little surprised because it was a lot of Geshe who was answering this. But so it's true. Chakpa here is talking about nyomon, right? And a nyondrip actually, right? The afflictive obscurations, right? But nyondrip yena nyomon yipem, nyomon yena nyondrip, nyondrip yena nyomon yipem makat. I think most of you who studied a little bit of Parchin know that, right? You have nyondrip, the afflictive obscurations, and then you have nyomong, which are the afflictions, which is a piece of that. But there's many things which are not, which are nyondrip, which are not nyomong. So the most obvious example is the main mind, right? The nyomong has to be a mental factor. An affliction is a mental factor. The main mind is not an affliction. But then the other thing, the more broad thing, is the seeds of the afflictions are not afflictions, but they are still the obscuration, the afflictive obscurations, right? So the Geshe last night, he said that they're all nyomong. What was it he said? Yeah, he said anything that Arhat abandons is necessarily a nyomong, which is ridiculous. I can't imagine a Geshe would say that. I'm not sure why he said that. But sometimes they say something very quickly, but then they because there are a lot of Geshe, they don't want to admit it was a mistake, so they'll try to defend it. So he was defending this position that anything of Arhat abandons is necessarily a nyomong. So then they give the example of what follows that the seeds of the afflictions are nyomong. He said, dear Macau, right? Which means Well, in this context, there's no pervasion. But that doesn't that leaves a lot open. Sometimes you can have this little exemption where you say, okay, generally there's pervasion, but here there's not. But when it actually is the majority of the afflictive obscurations are not afflictions, right? But then you say that all afflictive obscurations are afflictions, except for this exception. But the exception actually is larger than the rule. Then it doesn't make much sense. So this this is how debate functions sometimes. So ma chakshing topo mebe kempa. So yeah. So in this context, chakpa, the word chakpa, which means attachment, raga, chakpa, raga, yeah. Yeah, it actually is referring to all afflictive obscurations. And then topa mebe kempa, topa is talking about all of the cognitive obscurations, the sheju. Right, so the mind that is free of both of those, that's the Buddha's mind. Chak shing topa mepa, ma chakpa ma topa. So nyene, so they've discovered that, they've found that. I mean, they've attained that state. Ringdu malompa namla, ringdu yimalumpa denie du trune. Yeah. So, So then, as soon as they attain that, then without waiting very long, meaning immediately, then they emanate as many bodies, as they're in order to help other beings, right? The idea is as soon as you have namkyen, right, omniscient consciousness, then the very next moment you're emanating emanation bodies, right? These are more points that we debate in Parchen. It looks very simple here, I suppose, although I don't know, emanating infinite bodies isn't so simple, but generally speaking, the language looks pretty straightforward. But when Parchen, these kinds of things get debated endlessly. So then you incite them to teach Dharma. So what I'm saying is debated here is that, right, when you have an emanation body, you have Buddha's. Is it the very second moment after you achieve omniscient consciousness are you immediately emanating emanation bodies? Right. There's many points about that. So if you're already a bodhisattva, you have other emanations. Do they all become Buddha at once? But like if you have emanations in infinite worlds, and then you are on the Vajra-like samadhi, that's the moment before Buddhahood, then you have the meditation on emptiness, direct perception of emptiness. So you should be a Nyamshakpa, right, an absorbed consciousness. So if you have another emanation in another world, does that emanation also have to go into absorption at the same time? If not, then you have two different streams of consciousness in one sentient being, but that's not supposed to happen. But if it does, then what if that emanation is in the middle of teaching the Dharma? Does it suddenly stop in mid-sentence and then enter into this equipoise because in some other world? But then he must have billions of emanations, so there's always one meditating in emptiness, so it becomes quite problematic. And then when you become Buddha, then the next moment after you're supposed to emanate the emanation body. But for example, the Buddha is born into the world and gradually practices to achieve enlightenment in that emanation. So do you have a supreme emanation body immediately? How can that happen? Because it takes some number of human years to get to that. So I don't know if these things really are that important, but in Parchen, this is used to sharpen the mind, we can say. Think more clearly about these things. So then Lobon Yeshi De, he says, again, the commentator, right? Janjup number Sangye Shetune. So yeah, then yeah, Shiprat Zedu. So he's saying recite like that, right? Janjup number Sangye Shetune Shiprat Zedu. So he's saying you recite it in that way. Janjup number Sangye. So Janjup Chotu Shuda Chotu Dikta Nam Janjup Rimbar Sangye Machagne. Janjup Rimbar Sangye. So it says Janjup Rimpar Sangye. He's saying you recite it as Janjup Nampar Sangye, like complete Buddhas. So they're saying the Rimpar, right? Because he didn't actually explain that here. right? You notice in Tsongkhapa's explanation, the word says rimpar in the verse, but in the explanation it just says du nampar sange, so complete Buddhas. So the rimpar just means, though it says stages, it really means a complete Buddha. Okay, why don't we stop actually? We're getting, there's quite a bit more and it's getting later, so we can continue with the Soldap. You have Soldap Yanlag next week. Okay, so any questions? Yes. Oh.
Yeah, so today we're debating with friend Soka about difference between what is a karmic seed, a difference between a karmic seed and a karmic and the seed of an affliction, and what.
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, that's very involved, but you have to first of all. Yes, you have nyomongi sabon would literally mean a seed of an affliction, right? And then a karmic seed, right? So legi sabon. This is quite hard. So, for example, just with the karma itself, right? So if you have, a negative action, if you like killing, then you have the seed, which is the let's say impulse, but that's not the right quite. The propensity to do it again, right? And then you also have the seed that's going to ripen as the effect of that. So are those two the same thing? And how do they function together? Which one is the substantial continuum of that? Right. So the different schools have quite different points, quite different understanding of that. For one thing, that's quite a lot, especially when you study the Chittamatra. So the CPN Laki Bakchak, you have the four kinds of Bakchak or imprints. Generally speaking, Bakchak and Sabon are Donchik, right? Imprint and seed. But then when you have the Nisu Chepa, right? You have the Nyomong, Nyomongi Sabon, Nyomongi Bakchak, then they're two different things. So you say Bakchak, Sabon Nisu Chepa Bakchak, Sabon Tambacha Nisu Chepa Bakchak. Right? So in general, seed and imprint are the same. But when you say first there's the seeds, then there's the imprints, then you separate them as two different things, right? Anyway, so you have, in this context, the four kinds of Bakchak for Chittamatra, right? Sipiyan Laki Bakchak, Riktumbe Bakchak, Ngunjuki Bakchak, Daktai Bakchak. So you'll get that in Kunchi in a couple of years. So the Sipiyan Laki Bakchak, the Sipiyan Lak is the limbs of existence, of samsara. So that is the Penchiki lay, right? Or the Penchiki Laki Bakchak, really. The throwing karma, the imprints of that, right? So it's clearly not the same, because an arhat, for example, the Hinayana arhat can no longer have the seeds of afflictions. They wouldn't have the propensity to kill, but they could still experience the effect of past killing. So that's a different imprint that's in their mind.
So they would have they wouldn't have the seed of the affliction, but they would have
the imprint of having past actions.
Karmic seed.
So then the question is that shager? Is it a cognitive affliction? It follows that it's not a cognitive affliction, because there is a Hinayana practitioner who's abandoned it. Because when the Hinayana arhat achieves remainderless nirvana, that's no longer there. So they do abandon it. In the Kapaduchi Gidungel, in Yandakta, you have this Kapaduchi Gidungel Nirwashi Nirshi, the pacification of compounded suffering. Yeah. So when you have that, you no longer experience the effect of karma. So the arhat has abandoned that. The one who's achieved remainderless nirvana. But then it can't be shedrup, because if it's shedrup, then Nyonyento can abandon it. If it's a cognitive obscuration, then no Hinayana practitioner can abandon even a piece of it, according to the system. So it's not shedrup, it's not nyondrup. So what is it? It's neither a cognitive. So it follows that there's a obscuration that's neither a cognitive obscuration nor a afflictive obscuration. and that contradicts Uta, right? The Madhyamaka, what is it? Madhya Vibhanga, right? The distinguishing middle and extremes. It says that those are the only two kinds of obscurations. So there's quite a bit of question about this. Sorry, I wasn't sure, not sure that's quite what you were asking, but so the point is that the arhat who has remained, with the remainder, that's what the remainder is. They have the body that's carrying karmic imprints, and they still experience that. But when they die, that basis is gone, so they no longer experience that. So in the Chittamatra system, right, they have that's one thing. The Sipiganaki Bakchak is a different kind of Bakchak. Then the Daktai Bakchak is the seeds of apprehending self, right? And then the Riktungi Bakchak is the seeds of past experience that leads to present experience. So when you see color blue, it's not because there's an external thing called blue. It's because you have the imprint to see a particular color that ripens. And then you have the Ngondragi Bakchak, which is the seeds of particular thought patterns that frames how you experience the world. But then in the Prasangika, that's when it actually becomes quite interesting. It's not interesting before, but that distinction becomes quite important because you have the Jigva, right? The disintegratedness is a functioning thing, and then so you have the disintegratedness of the karma is still virtue or non-virtue, whereas the Bakchak is not. So what is actually carrying the karma, right? That you have, it's not totally clear in their text, or even in the Gelong text, it's not clear. So that becomes a very big point of debate. Is like when you have the Prasangika say that they might be that the jikpa is the karmic propensity, right? So that's why it's still gewa, because like Chandrakirti, he says gangchi ranjigiri migakpa dechir kunchi mekyan denuchir, right? So because it doesn't cease inherently, then even though there's no all of our unconsciousness, migakpa dechir kunchi mekyan minuchir lala lega gyunen lo nekyang. Right? So although there's a very long time passes, still the result can come. So there's no all ground consciousness to carry it. So how does it continue? Well, because it doesn't cease inherently. It only ceases from a particular perspective. The non-virtue still exists. So you don't have to have this idea that they have in the Chittamatra that you do an action, then the action is over. So where is it poured? Well, you must store it in this storehouse consciousness. He's saying it still exists. The past exists as a functioning thing, and so it affects the present. So the non-virtue is still, it doesn't travel anywhere. It's still non-virtue until it's purified. So that there doesn't have to be this thing that's separate that you talk about. Where did it go? Because it's only gone from your perspective. It's not that it actually is from its own side. That there's no longer this is non-virtue. So in his system in Chandrakirti, he basically says that it has to do with your misapprehension of time, that you experience time in a way that doesn't actually exist from its own side. So this whole question of what carries the imprint is irrelevant from the actual side of the object. It has to do with your own limited perspective. Whereas the Chittamatra, they're saying that there's two different kinds of seeds. There's the seeds of the karma, the seeds and the propensities, the afflictions.
But they would still make, like, for the example of the arhat, does it make a distinction? Would they still make the distinction, the prasangikas? With regard to the arhat wouldn't have the seed of the afflictions, but would have the seed of karma.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm not sure they would use the seed of karma word.
They would.
But yes, generally speaking, yes. There's no disagreement actually in any Buddhist school, because they all agree that the Buddha was very clear about that too. It's in the sutras. Like we have Moggallana and other arhats who died miserable deaths because they had the past karma to do so, right? So it's very clear that happens, but how that happens, and then yeah, the reward, their whole idea of remainder and remainderless too was quite different in Prasangika. And so the terminology of that, but in terms of what happens, they agree. Okay, there's karma, there's the experience results, there's arhats and this and that, but why that happens and how to explain it is quite different. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Three things. The first is actually the question Mikyöpa Mitrupa. Mitrupa is the original term said in the Nada in the Jajabammunipa. So that was what was said by the kings
Okay.
early. So that's
okay.
used.
Yeah.
And later, it seems Mikyöpa is so often used; it's nearly synonymous. So it's actually Kyöpa is probably like the translation of chalati, and that's something like being agitated or flustered or something. So that's the first. And
yeah, achala. That's right.
Yeah.
Mitrupa is achala. You're right. Yeah. That's, it is different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay then.
But as I said, like we had the 5 Buddha families. You never use Mitrupa for the you know the Vajra family, right? Mikyöpa.
Even though that would be.
Yeah, and then you have the action tantra deity Mitrupa Achala. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
And then the other 2 things you mentioned regarding the possibility of partaking in others' merit.
Yeah.
Right, and so there were 2 things that came to my mind. One is the Buddha, I think, once declared, if you become bhikshus or monks due to my merit, you shall never,
experience cold, die of cold or hunger, right?
Yeah, cold or hunger.
Yeah.
And always be provided for. I think also it's kind of like you partake, the more faith you have in your teaching, his merit, that's another.
Yeah.
And then also that Amitabha Buddha, right, while he was on the path, he made the aspiration that all beings particularly easily reach my Buddha field.
Yeah.
So I wonder what's the philosophical grounds for that? And then also a connected question. I mean, can we, like, what's the philosophical underpinning of, can we refute, or can we say, yes, that's plausible? And the same as with taking on other suffering, like in the story of Milarepa, who took on Rechumpa's suffering and then transferred it to the door and so forth. So those are my 2 questions.
Okay, so first of all, the question of others' merit. So that's a difficult question. I mean, generally speaking, as you know, in this system, they encourage using reasoning and evidence rather than just scripture. So, like with that, there's the saying, if you just recite the name of Amitabha Buddha, he'll be born in the Pure Land. That's pretty clear. The position of not just the Gelok, it's in the Mahayana Sutra Lamkara at the Dodikan by Maitreya. It says very clearly that's not to be taken literally. That was a statement made for lazy people. That's what it says in the text. That people who, it sounds critical, but the point is that for somebody who, they think about all this work you have to do to achieve enlightenment. So there's this sense of encouragement that you can just recite this name and it will create this. The understanding is that it's any kind of statement that's interpretive. It's not just said randomly. So it said that yes, saying the name of Amitabha Buddha will make the imprint to be born there, but it will take a long time. It will gradually, over many lifetimes, bring you to that state. But at the same time, there's an understanding that there's the being born there is a dependent arising between the prayers of beings and the merit of beings and the prayers of the Buddha. Right, so it's like one way I thought about it. We had this conversation with Gyabje Lama Tsongkhapa at Kopan during his teaching. That was you can probably find it online because there was those teachings he gave for several months during COVID, and then when Namjung and I were there, we were in the audience so that we were part of the discussion sometimes. And he got into a debate with me about this point, and you can see what I said, but I'm not sure I totally agree with it. It was on the spot. But one thing I would say is that it's like to say, oh, well, by making a prayer, can you affect somebody else? Does that contradict karma? I don't think it contradicts karma any more than if you give somebody medicine, you can benefit them, right? So how do you benefit them? Well, if they have the karma to be sick, how does your medicine benefit them? Well, how does your prayer benefit them? The question isn't about contradicting karma. The question is about, is there distant influence on physical bodies? If that can happen, then there's no real substantial difference between that and benefiting somebody with medicine. The question is, can you affect something that's far away with your mind? It shouldn't necessarily contradict karma, because the idea is that if the person has that karma, it helps that karma to ripen. Otherwise, you can never do anything for anybody. Why try to help anybody? Just let them live out their karma. It's like you for one thing, you can be the catalyst. If they have the karma to be taught, well, maybe you're the one that's supposed to teach them. But also, more so practically in terms of how you think, that there's conditions. It's not just that you have karma and it just is fate. You have different potentials, but those potentials can be ripened. So if you have somebody who's had very abusive background, you don't just say, well, forget this life, he's not going to accomplish anything. You say, well, yes, he has a very bad background that's making a lot of obstacles in his life, but there's a lot of different potentials there, and depending on who he meets and how what guidance he gets, he could actually go in the right direction. So likewise with the prayer, it's not that you can just it makes this point again and again in the sutras that if the Buddha could just liberate everybody, everyone would already be liberated. But there is some degree of the question really is more, is there some kind of connection that's non-physical, that's unseen? And that seems to be pretty clearly understood to be the case in the texts. And also this, you asked about Reichungpa and Milrepa. And again, I think the idea is that when there's a very strong connection between people, sometimes that can enhance that ability. So generally speaking, when you visualize taking on other suffering, it's mainly for your own benefit of transforming your self-cherishing. But in certain circumstances, depending on different conditions, it can have some effect. It's not, if it was so simple, then of course the Buddha would already have done it. But different people have different karmic connections. That's why it said we need to become Buddhas. If there was, if one Buddha could just do all the work, then why would anyone else need to become Buddha? But because of different karmic connections, we might have, I think His Holiness said this, that you have uncommon karma with people from your past lives, and your becoming Buddha is going to benefit them more than some other person who became Buddha in the past who doesn't have that same karma connection with them. Okay, yeah, that's good for now.
Everybody be theoretically okay next time, like 4:15 maybe?
We can talk about that, yeah, after maybe, yeah. Yeah, let's do the prayers and then we can talk about it.
fastest pace, the lack of miles from working with effort of this practice for a great length of time, and become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose minds, whose minds blinded by ignorance. In the event of non-reaching state, may I health and in loving compassion for all my lives, Manjushri. May I find the best complete way to pass of the teachings, and may I please all the Buddhas by my practice. Using skillful means drawn by the source of compassion, may I clear the darkness from the minds of all beings with the points of the path as I have discerned them. May I uphold the Buddha's teachings for a very long time. With my heart going out with great compassion in whatever direction the most precious teachings have not yet spread, or once spread have declined, may I reveal this treasure of happiness and aid. In the minds of those who wish for liberation be granted boundless peace, and the Buddha's deeds be numerous for a very long time. This way the path to enlightenment be completed to the one most virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their sons. All human beings who eliminate adversity and create conditions for practice the excellent paths, never departed in their lives from the pure paths praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes effort to practice and opposes the tenfold Maya and virtuous practices, may he always be assisted by the mighty ones, and may oceans of prosperity spread everywhere.